Imagine trying to orchestrate a continent-wide spiritual movement. You have this massive objective, but half of your leaders are faking their qualification.
Right.
Your most zealous supporters are like viciously attacking each other in public, and your critics are just standing on the sidelines waiting for the whole thing to collapse.
It's a mess.
It really is. You're looking at a landscape that is the absolute definition of a structural and spiritual disaster zone. Well, welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we're taking a deep dive into an instruction manual written for that precise scenario.
Yeah, we are unpacking Part B of Jonathan Edwards' thoughts on revival.
And for you listening, our mission today is to uncover Edwards' highly specific practical steps for promoting a spiritual awakening. We're going to look at his 18th century instructions and analyze how they apply to your life today.
Because, human nature, whether it's in 1742 or right now, it hasn't changed one bit.
Not at all. So to really grasp what's happening here, you have to understand the sheer chaos of New England during this period, right?
Absolutely. Edwards is writing right in the middle of a massive religious stirring. It's what we now call the First Great Awakening.
Yeah.
The previous sections of his treatise, they dealt heavily with defending the revival and pointing out the theological errors of the critics.
Yeah.
But Part V is a completely different animal.
It's his positive instruction manual.
Precisely. He stops the arguments and lays out the actionable steps for clearing the way for God's work. He recognizes that, well, you can't build a house on a foundation covered in debris.
No, you have to get your hands dirty and clear the site first.
Right.
And the way he says we must clear that site is probably the last thing a public relations team today would suggest.
Yeah, for sure.
He insists the very first step to promoting a revival is removing stumbling blocks through public, humiliating confession.
Yeah.
He takes this right out of the book of Isaiah, doesn't he?
He does. He points to the literal imagery in Isaiah 40. Prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God.
Yeah, and Isaiah 57 too, right?
Right. Take the stumbling block out of the way of my people. Edwards views unconfessed sin as literal boulders sitting in the middle of the road.
Wow.
And from his theological framework, which relies heavily on the absolute holiness of God, the divine presence cannot and will not advance over the unrepentant pride of his people.
The kingdom of heaven requires a clear highway.
It does.
And he's an equal opportunity bulldozer when it comes to these boulders. He says both sides of the religious divide must repent.
Yeah, nobody gets a free pass.
Let's start with his critics. He targets those who oppose the revival or spoke lightly of it, and he says they need to openly confess their fault.
Especially the ministers.
Right. The ministers who prejudice the minds of their congregations against the work. He argues they can't just quietly change their minds, slip into the back pew, and pretend they were always on board.
No, he specifically calls out that very human tendency to minimize our own faults. When people realize they were wrong about something massive, their first instinct is damage control.
Yeah, they want to say, I only objected to this one minor imprudence or something.
Or I always supported the core idea, just not the execution.
Right.
Edwards rejects that completely. You must openly declare your conviction and condemn yourself for what you've done.
And he raises the stakes to an absolute zenith here.
He really does.
He argues that in speaking lightly of this work, these critics were actually speaking against Christ and potentially against the Holy Ghost.
Yes.
I want to pause right there because speaking against the Holy Ghost is a terrifying concept for any believer. What's the logical mechanism behind that claim?
Well,
Why is it not just a disagreement over church style?
the mechanism is rooted in the source of the revival itself. If this awakening is a genuine outpouring of the Spirit of God, which Edwards firmly believes it is then attributing that work to, say, emotionalism or human manipulation.
Or demonic influence.
Right, or demonic influence.
Yeah.
Doing that is a direct insult to the third person of the Trinity.
That's a massive deal.
It is. Even if someone opposed it out of ignorance, once their eyes are open to the reality that God was the author, they are bound by duty to publicly confess their opposition.
You cannot privately reconcile a public slander against the Almighty.
Spot on. You just can't.
But then he turns his sights on his own allies, the zealous promoters of the revival.
Yep.
He says if they broke Christian rules, injured others, or violated good order in their zeal, they also have to publicly confess and humble themselves.
Which is hard for them to swallow.
And this is where I see a massive practical problem, an objection that Edwards actually anticipates in the text itself.
Hey, you're right.
If we openly admit our faults, if the church airs its dirty laundry for the whole town to see, won't the enemies of religion just weaponize that against us?
Oh, yeah?
Like, won't they use our public apologies to mock the church and discredit the whole movement?
That is the most natural fear in the world.
Yeah.
Edwards acknowledges that, to the shame of some critics, enemies have indeed taken advantage of public retractions.
He points to George Whitefield, right?
He does. George Whitefield, the famous evangelist who was essentially the spark plug of the Great Awakening. Whitefield showed a remarkably good spirit in retracting some of his earlier, harsher statements against other ministers.
Critics absolutely use those retractions as ammunition to call him unstable or hypocritical.
They did. But Edwards offers a striking counter-argument to this fear. He states that using the fear of mockery as an excuse for visible impenitence is doing evil in order to prevent evil.
Doing evil to prevent evil. Let's unpack the mechanics of that.
Sure.
He's saying that hiding your sin is an evil act, and you're doing it to prevent the evil act of someone else mocking you. You're trying to manage the PR of the church through deception.
Precisely. And it's a terrible strategy because it assumes God needs our deception to protect his reputation.
Wow.
Edwards argues that standing stubborn in a known sin gives the enemy far more ammunition than Christian humility ever could.
Right, when Christians act like true believers by openly humbling themselves after openly offending it, brings the greatest honor to Christ.
The logic here is that God is far more likely to appear on behalf of a humble, repentant church than a proud, defensive one trying to manage its own image.
So the first step is out with the pride, in with the public confession. You clear the literal rocks off the road.
Clear them out.
But once you've confessed, you can't just stand there patting yourself on the back for your transparency. If you want to sustain the revival, Edwards says the church has to adopt a very specific posture moving forward.
Yes.
And that posture is meekness.
Edwards calls for extraordinary moderation and mutual forbearance. He quotes the Apostle Paul in Philippians 4:5, "Let your moderation be known to all men. The Lord is at hand."
So it's about an awareness of God's presence.
Yes, the psychological reality he's pointing to is that the awe of the divine majesty should entirely deter us from fierceness and bitterness.
I mean, when you realize the searcher of all hearts is remarkably present in your community, the urge to judge your neighbor should vanish. He actually says our business at such a time should be at home searching ourselves and condemning ourselves. We have to stop looking across the aisle.
Yeah.
We have to stop using what he calls odious names. And reading that phrase, odious names, it felt like he was diagnosing our current cultural moment.
Oh, completely.
We are obsessed with stigmatizing each other with labels, dividing everyone into two hostile armies drawn up in battle array.
And it completely paralyzes the work of God. When you apply odious names to your theological opponents, you're no longer trying to persuade them. You're trying to destroy them.
Right.
And Edwards extends this instruction of meekness to how we handle the zealous folks who made genuine mistakes.
The ones who went a bit too far.
Yeah. He notes there is abundant reason to think most of these overzealous promoters are dear children of God. We should use their errors as a reason to humble ourselves, realizing how easily even genuine believers can go astray when left to their own devices.
He also gives a very specific instruction on patience for those who are suffering under corrupt church leadership.
This part is crucial.
He says Christians shouldn't be overly hasty to fix every corruption all at once. After a long period of degeneracy in the visible church, things can't all be made right overnight.
It takes time.
It does. And here's the part that stood out to me. He argues that if believers forcefully separate or try to violently deliver themselves from these difficulties, they actually hold back the very deliverance they want.
That's because taking matters into your own hands through division betrays a fundamental lack of faith.
Right.
Edwards is demanding that believers have recourse directly to the throne of grace. You take the difficulties to the great shepherd, and then you wait patiently for his timing.
I want to use an analogy here based on a beautiful piece of biblical exposition Edwards pulls from the Song of Solomon.
Go for it.
He references the verse, "I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you not stir up nor awake my love until he pleases."
Yeah.
So think of impatient Christians like anxious passengers on a ship. They're caught in a massive storm, and the captain Christ is asleep below deck. At the very first sign of a rough wave, instead of trusting the captain's perfect knowledge of the sea, they panic. They run below deck, shaking him, trying to forcefully wake him up.
They lack the faith to wait for his appointed time to calm the storm.
Yes. And in their panic, they're just creating more chaos on the boat.
I think that captures his intent perfectly. Edwards points out that when the church is in distress, God is often represented in Scripture as being asleep.
But he has an appointed time for awakening.
Right. The church's success lies in waiting with that meekness. He looks at the imagery in the Song of Solomon where the church is described as a lily among thorns, and believers are compared to the gazelles or hinds of the field.
Why gazelles? I mean, why not something stronger, like a lion or a bear?
Because gazelles are creatures of a gentle, harmless nature. They are not beasts of prey.
They don't attack.
No, they don't devour each other. They don't fight with their enemies. Their instinct is to flee and seek refuge.
Ah, I see.
Edwards is stating that the church must endure suffering with the harmless, gentle endurance of a gazelle, rather than adopting the aggressive posture of a predator.
We are not called to be wolves tearing at the thorns.
Precisely. Only when we maintain that gentle posture does Christ awake and come leaping upon the mountains to our defense.
But Edwards doesn't just offer sweet poetry about gazelles and lilies. He pivots to a severe warning.
He really shifts gears here.
If you fail to wait patiently, and if you adopt a cynical, hardened posture, it doesn't just stall the revival. It brings devastating consequences.
This is a crucial theological pivot. He states that a season of great grace is simultaneously a day of divine vengeance for those who neglect it.
Let's stop right there. Grace and vengeance happening at the very same time? How do those two concepts coexist in a single moment?
It comes back to the dual nature of God's interaction with humanity. He points to Isaiah 61, where the acceptable year of the Lord is intrinsically linked to the day of vengeance of our God.
Yeah.
He quotes Christ speaking about the days of the apostles, calling them the days of vengeance.
So what's the mechanism there?
The mechanism is this. At the very moment the axe is laid to the root of the tree to cut down the fruitless branches, the earth is also being reaped, and God's elect are being gathered.
The harvest of wheat and the trampling of the vintage go together.
Exactly. I mean, absolutely. The light that warms the seed also scorches the barren ground.
He makes a striking historical observation here about who usually falls under that scorching heat. He says God often bypasses the older, stiff-necked generation.
The biblical pattern he traces here is staggering.
Yeah.
He looks at the Israelites in the wilderness.
Okay.
There was a massive outpouring of God's Spirit on the younger generation, the ones under 20, who eventually entered Canaan with Joshua.
Right.
Edwards argues there was no generation spoken of so highly in all of Scripture. But the older generation, they remained obstinate.
They murmured continuously.
They refused to be convinced by the wondrous works of God happening right in front of their eyes.
Yeah.
So God left them to perish in the wilderness.
And he brings up the Babylonian captivity, too.
Yes. When God was preparing to show great mercy and return the Jews to their land, there was a blessed outpouring of the Spirit to bring them to deep conviction and prayer.
But not on everyone.
No, that spirit of supplication wasn't poured out on the old generation who were carried captive. The older heads of families were exceedingly obstinate and refused to listen to the prophet Jeremiah.
So the captivity lasted just long enough for that perverse older generation to die off.
Yep. While Jeremiah found his success among the youth.
So we have to ask the hard question here. What does this mean for the people Edwards is writing to?
It's a heavy question.
Is he suggesting God arbitrarily discards older people, or is there a psychological and spiritual mechanism at play? Like, why is the older generation's heart so much harder?
It's entirely about the mechanism of the hardened heart. Older generations often suffer from a spiritual sunk cost fallacy.
Ooh, a sunk cost fallacy. Say more about that.
Well, they've spent decades building their theological frameworks and their ecclesiastical structures.
Right.
When God begins a work that operates outside those familiar parameters, their pride tells them it must be false. Because if it were true, it would mean they had been missing something for 40 years.
That's a bitter pill to swallow.
Very. Their cynicism and refusal to be convinced by the wonders before their eyes makes them immune to the grace being poured out.
So Edwards issues a severe warning to the older generation in New England to take heed.
He tells them to stop murmuring against the work of God, lest their carcasses fall in the wilderness while their children are brought into a land flowing with milk and honey.
He also directs a very specific plea to a particular theological group, the Arminians.
Yes, the Arminians.
For you listening who might not be familiar with 18th century theological debates, Arminianism highlights human free will and cooperation in salvation, which conflicted sharply with Edwards' reformed Calvinistic view that salvation is entirely a sovereign work of God's grace, where man is totally depraved and unable to save himself.
That context is vital. Edwards asks the Arminians to seriously weigh whether the substance of this revival is indeed the work of God.
He challenges them.
He challenges them to see if any logical middle ground can be found between owning this work as a sovereign act of God and just sliding all the way into becoming a deist.
And a deist being someone who believes God created the universe like a clockmaker, wound it up and then stepped back, never intervening in human affairs.
Right. Edwards is forcing a dilemma. If you admit God is actively changing thousands of hearts in New England, people who were entirely hostile to religion, suddenly weeping over their sin, that shatters the deist clockmaker idea.
Because God is actively intervening.
Absolutely. And because these conversions are happening so suddenly and powerfully without human cooperation, it overthrows the Arminian scheme of religion too.
But he doesn't say this to mock them.
No, not at all. He actually invites them almost warmly, quoting Moses speaking to his father-in-law Hobab, "Come with us, and we will do you good."
But the threat of judgment doesn't fall heaviest on the older generation or on theological opponents. It falls heaviest on one specific group.
The leadership.
The leadership.
Yeah.
And this leads us to what is easily the most devastating section of the entire text. If the older generation is hardened, who is leading the church? Edwards points directly at the pulpit.
He paints an agonizing picture of the unconverted minister.
It's brutal.
He describes it as a wretched bondage to stand before an awakened congregation, a congregation where people are experiencing deep conviction and divine light and have to fake the airs of a saint.
The psychological torment he describes is chilling. I want to put ourselves in that room for a second.
Let's do it.
Imagine sitting in your pastoral study. A member of your congregation walks in, weeping uncontrollably over the weight of their sin. Or maybe they're rejoicing with this inexpressible joy over their salvation. And you, the supposed spiritual guide, have absolutely no idea what they're talking about.
You're just blank.
You've never felt that weight. You've never seen that light. You have to sit there pretending you understand. You have to force a joyful expression on your face when there's nothing but cold emptiness in your own heart.
He calls it a miserable, torturous slavery. The sheer amount of artifice and deception required to conceal your true state from your own flock must be exhausting.
It has to be.
And beyond the psychological toll, there is the theological reality of provoking God. Edwards concludes, based on a rigorous reading of Scripture, that no sort of men in the world will be so low in hell as ungodly ministers.
Lowest in hell.
Yes, everything that aggravates guilt and heightens divine wrath applies directly to them, because they are handling the holy things of God with dead hands.
It's the ultimate terrifying form of imposter syndrome. It's a guide pretending to know the way to a city he's never visited, while the eternal souls of his listeners are on the line.
Exactly. I mean, it's horrifying.
And worse, when wild enthusiasm or irregularities do pop up in the church, which we know happens in these chaotic zones, this unconverted minister has no courage to correct it.
How could he?
Right. How can he speak out against false zeal when his own conscience screams that he has absolutely no true zeal of his own?
This raises the obvious question. What is the required antidote for leadership in such a time?
What does he say?
Edwards argues that true ministers need an extreme fullness of the Spirit. They need a double portion. He uses a remarkable dual analogy. He says they need to be as full of light as a mirror held out in the sun.
A mirror held out in the sun.
They need to reflect the blazing reality of God so clearly that they become like angels, a flame of fire.
He points out two specific qualities that are exceedingly necessary: zeal and resolve. And he makes a bold claim. He says a man of ordinary intellectual capacity who possesses zeal and resolve will accomplish more than someone with 10 times the learning who lacks them.
He looks at military and ecclesiastical history to prove this point. He cites Alexander the Great.
An interesting choice.
Yeah, he notes that the appearance of a thoroughly engaged spirit and fearless courage in Alexander did 3 times as much towards conquering the world as all the actual physical blows his army struck.
The sheer force of his resolve broke the enemy's will.
Right. He cites Oliver Cromwell in the same vein, and then he brings it to his contemporary, George Whitefield, running through the British dominions.
Running with that same fire.
When people see that kind of relentless, engaged spirit, it awes them. They naturally yield to that authority without even disputing the matter.
But when leaders are cold, dull, and just going through the old formal motions, people don't even think of yielding. Our cowardice actually invites opposition.
Yes.
Edwards poses a hypothetical. If the ministers of New England had Whitefield's zeal and courage, what could they not do? The entire landscape would shift.
And he applies this desperate need for zealous leadership directly to the colleges.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
He says he will take the liberty of an Englishman to speak his mind freely. Colleges, he insists, must be nurseries of piety.
Nurseries of piety.
If institutions like Harvard or Yale tolerate vice and idleness, they are fundamentally ruined and undone as to their main design.
He calls it the greatest nonsense and absurdity imaginable to have places designed to bring up ambassadors for Jesus Christ become places of spiritual infection.
Yeah, if the water source is poisoned, the whole valley dies.
He specifically highlights the practice of Dr. Philip Doddridge in England, who ran a highly respected dissenting academy.
Doddridge was incredible.
He made it a rigorous point to frequently converse with each student alone about the state of their soul, concluding those sessions with prayer.
Edwards is demanding that instructors take personal, individual care to educate their students in practical godliness, not just in classical languages or human learning. True leadership requires deep, intense soul care.
So we've dealt with the paralyzed leadership and the corrupted colleges, but Edwards realizes a movement can't survive solely on the backs of the clergy.
No, it needs everyone.
Lay people, particularly those with vast resources and societal influence, have a specific mandate. If the ministers are leading the charge, the wealthy lay people have to fund the supply lines.
Edwards addresses the great men high in honor, wealth, and influence.
The elite.
He notes a certain unhappy shyness they often display with respect to religion. They are intensely careful of their societal honor and very afraid of appearing openly forward or zealous, operating under the assumption that such displays might debase their character or expose them to the contempt of their peers.
He tells them to look at the life of David. David was the highest in honor and dignity, the great sovereign king of Israel.
Yeah.
But when the Ark of the Covenant was being brought up to Jerusalem, David stripped off his royal robes and danced before it. He made himself vile in the eyes of his scoffing wife, Michal. He risked his dignity.
And Edwards points out that by doing so, David animated and encouraged the whole congregation.
Rich men have a massive talent in their hands, but they usually have no share in heavenly treasures because they lack the heart to risk their reputation or use their wealth for the kingdom.
Edwards issues a scathing critique of what he calls the narrow, penurious notions of wealthy Christians regarding their temporal goods.
They hold on tight.
They want to hold on to their estates tightly.
Yeah.
He argues that the primitive Christians didn't think this way at all. They were trained by the apostles to give liberally, even selling their lands to support the work.
He lists very specific, practical things they should be funding. This isn't abstract charity. He wants them establishing funds for the propagation of religion, supporting preachers in destitute rural areas, finding poor children with promising intellectual abilities, and paying for their education for the ministry.
Distributing books that promote vital religion.
Building schools in poor villages. He remarks that if rich men gave even a quarter of their estates to promote this work, they would act a little like they were actually designed for the kingdom of heaven.
This is where Edwards makes a massive theological pivot to support his call for charity.
Oh, this is a big one.
He states categorically that moral duties, acts of righteousness, truth, meekness, forgiveness, and charity matter vastly more to God than external acts of worship.
Wait, I want to make sure I understand the weight of that claim. He's saying that giving money to a poor student matters more to God than praying, hearing sermons, singing hymns, and attending church meetings.
Yes.
Wow.
He leans heavily on Christ's words in the Gospel of Matthew. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. Edwards divides the expressions of religion into two distinct categories.
Okay, what are they?
The first sort is outward acts of worship, bowing down, attending sacraments, speaking honorably of God in prayer.
Right.
The second sort is expressing love to God by obeying his moral commands toward our fellow man, showing self-denial, righteousness, and charity. He argues the latter has vastly greater weight in the eyes of heaven.
He says, hypocrites and self-righteous people usually abound in the first kind. It's incredibly easy to go to a meeting. It's easy to sing a song. It costs you nothing. But the prophets in Christ always elevated the second kind. The external acts of worship, Edwards says, are the cheapest part of religion, and the least contrary to our natural lusts.
Yeah, wicked men will submit to any form of worship you want, as long as they can keep their covetousness and their malice intact.
To understand this from a Reformed perspective, we have to look at the Ten Commandments. The moral law is divided into two tablets.
Yes.
The first tablet, Commandments 1 through 4, deals with our direct duties to God, like worship and the Sabbath. The second tablet, Commandments 5 through 10, deals with our duties to our neighbor, like not stealing, not coveting, and showing mercy.
Edwards is arguing that you cannot claim to love the God of the first tablet if you are actively violating the mercy demanded by the second tablet.
We can't express our love to God by doing anything profitable to Him because the Almighty needs absolutely nothing from us. He's entirely self-sufficient.
So God has constituted our neighbors as his receivers. You hand the bread to your neighbor, but Christ receives it.
I have to throw some serious pushback at Edwards here.
Let's hear it.
He promises incredible things for those who give to the poor. He quotes Isaiah 58, promising that if you draw out your soul to the hungry, your light shall break forth, and God will satisfy your soul in drought.
Right.
He essentially promises spiritual blessings, divine discoveries, and intense emotional consolations in exchange for charitable giving. Doesn't that risk turning charity into a self-righteous, transactional purchase?
Like a trade.
Yeah. It sounds like I give a poor kid a coat and God gives me a spiritual high in return.
That is a brilliant objection, and Edwards tackles it head on. He fully acknowledges that people might say doing deeds of charity in the hope of obtaining spiritual comfort shows a legalistic, self-righteous spirit.
Right.
But his defense cuts right to the core of human motivation. He argues that if that is a valid objection, it ruins every religious duty whatsoever.
Walk me through that logic. How does it ruin every duty?
Think about the duties of the first tablet, like praying directly to God. Edwards argues that praying has an even more direct tendency to make people self-righteous than giving away money.
Oh, that makes sense.
People are far more ready to expect God to reward them for a long, eloquent, pious prayer than they are for quietly handing a coin to a beggar.
Wow. Yeah.
No duty should be neglected just because we fear our corrupt hearts might turn it into our own righteousness. Furthermore, charity requires actual self-denial. It costs us a tangible piece of our security, making it a truer test of faith than cheap external gestures like singing a hymn.
And he backs this up with some amazing biblical narratives. He uses the story of Abraham.
Yes, he points to Genesis 14. Abraham risks his life and the lives of his men to rescue his nephew Lot and the captives of Sodom from King Chedorlaomer.
A huge risk.
When the king of Sodom offers Abraham all the recovered wealth as a reward, Abraham refuses to take even a thread or a sandal strap for himself. He gives it all back to the people who had been stripped as everything.
And what happens next?
Because of this massive charitable act of self-denial, God immediately appears to Abraham in a vision in the very next chapter and says, "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield and your exceeding great reward."
The physical charity preceded the divine revelation.
Precisely.
He also mentions the women in the New Testament who supported Jesus financially out of their own means.
Right.
What was their reward for that charity?
They were the first to see him.
Yes, they were the very first ones to see him after the resurrection. They were allowed to hold him by the feet.
And then there's Cornelius, the Roman centurion in the book of Acts.
Right.
It was his generous alms to the people that came up as a memorial before God, prompting God to send Peter to preach the gospel to him. The pattern is undeniable.
Yeah.
Costly charity invites divine revelation.
Edwards concludes this section with a staggering thought. He says that if God's people abounded in deeds of love and charity as much as they do in hearing sermons and attending meetings, it would literally fetch the God of love down from heaven to set up his tabernacle on earth.
It's an incredible vision.
So we've cleared the foundation with individual humility. We've adopted the gentle posture of the gazelle. We've dealt with the terror of hypocritical leadership. And we've called the wealthy to radical, self-denying charity.
We've covered a lot.
But Edwards doesn't end there. He climaxes his entire argument with a logistical master plan.
The logistics are fascinating.
He wants massive, unified, collective action. And the engine for that action is abundant fasting and prayer.
He argues from a deep theological conviction that it is God's will that the prayers of his saints should be the principal means of carrying on his kingdom.
From a reform standpoint, God ordains the ends, but he also ordains the means.
Right, and the primary means is prayer. Before God accomplishes great things, he pours out a spirit of grace and supplication on his people.
Yeah.
Edwards uses an astonishing phrase here. He says God is, as it were, at the command of the prayer of faith. He writes that God puts himself under the power of his people's prayers.
That is a radical way to phrase it, especially for a theologian so focused on God's absolute sovereignty.
It really is.
He's saying that even the weakest person, a poor man sitting in his modest cottage, can have a blessed influence all over the world. They can storm the gates of heaven with their incessant prayers.
But Edwards is a practitioner, not just a theorist. He moves from lofty theology into highly practical logistics for these days of fasting and prayer.
He knows that simply telling people to pray more doesn't work. You have to give them a structure.
Right. He suggests breaking the congregations down. He points out that just sitting in the main meeting house all day, where the people are entirely passive while the minister talks, is not effective for a day of fasting.
So what's his solution?
He proposes dividing the town into specific demographic groups. As early as possible in the morning, men should gather by themselves, women by themselves, young men, young women, and even companies of children gathering in all parts of the town to pray.
Then, around midday, they all converge at the house of God for public prayer and a sermon specifically tailored to the occasion. Afterward, they retire back into their private societies to spend the rest of the day praying together. He found this exact method to be of massive benefit in engaging the minds of the people in his own congregation in Northampton.
It removes the passivity and forces active participation.
He also pushes for the church to take the Lord's Supper much more frequently. He wonders why, with all the increase in preaching and singing during the revival, there hasn't been a corresponding increase in commemorating the dying love of the Redeemer.
He notes that the primitive church took communion weekly, and he advocates returning to that frequency.
He goes further and advocates for drafting public covenants. The logistics of this are fascinating to me.
Oh, the covenants are brilliant.
A minister would write out a formal document explicitly mentioning the particular duties the local congregation is prone to neglect and the specific sins they keep falling into.
So it's very specific.
Right. This isn't a generic statement of faith, it's a hyperlocal diagnosis. The people would have time to read and consider it, and then all who were capable would publicly subscribe to it, owning it as their solemn vow before God on a day of fasting.
And here's where I see Edwards operating on a completely different level of organizational genius. He proposes a church-wide, continent-wide day of fasting.
Yeah, massive undertaking.
But look at his method for organizing it. He says a group of ministers should draft a proposal setting a specific date. They send it to other ministers who get consent from their congregations and sign their names.
Signatures on paper.
Yes. Then they take all those physical signatures and send them to a printer in Boston. The printer publishes the full proposal with all the names and distributes it back out across the provinces so everyone knows exactly who is participating.
This is a brilliant strategy. Some might think everyone praying on the exact same calendar day is a trivial, legalistic detail.
But it's not.
Edwards argues it makes the union of God's people visible. It profoundly animates their devotion to know that thousands of others in different towns and different provinces are crying out to the same Father at the exact same moment.
It destroys the feeling of isolation.
He's literally drafting a blueprint for an 18th century social network. He recognized that shared information creates a shared movement.
He even suggests publishing a history of the revival's progress every fortnight, every 2 weeks.
A newsletter?
Yeah. He knew that tidings of God's grace in one place tend to awaken people in other places. He didn't want to rely on slow, doubtful rumors passing from town to town. He wanted a regular, reliable newsletter to keep the network informed.
This shatters the caricature of Edwards as just a lofty thinker locked in his study writing dense theology. He was a highly practical organizer trying to sustain a massive continent-wide awakening.
He really understood human psychology. He knew the need for visible unity and the sheer logistical effort required to keep a movement from fracturing under its own weight.
Okay, let's step back and look at the whole picture Edwards has painted for us today. He gives us a rigorous step-by-step manual for building a spiritual movement.
Let's recap.
First, you have to clear the path through public, humiliating confession of your own faults, completely regardless of what the enemy might do with that information.
Right.
Second, you must maintain a posture of gentle meekness. Stop forming battle lines and throwing odious names at other believers.
Leave the gazelle.
Be the gazelle. Third, recognize the terrible danger of missing the moment through hardened cynicism, a danger that falls heaviest on those who fake their spiritual vitality.
The hypocrites.
Fourth, engage in costly self-denying charity, because showing mercy to your neighbor matters more to God than your external sacrifices.
And finally, organize unified, highly structured prayer to storm the gates of heaven. It is a comprehensive vision. It moves seamlessly from the most hidden recesses of the individual heart, confessing hidden pride, all the way out to a coordinated multi-province network of believers acting in total concert. It's theology applied to the dirt and grime of real life.
So, what does this all mean for you listening right now? I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Jonathan Edwards believed that with just a printing press, some hand-signed letters, and a fortnightly newsletter riding on horseback over dirt roads, believers across an entire continent could unite in a single day of purposeful prayer and change the world.
He saw the incredible potential of shared information to build a visible, unstoppable union.
Today, you have instant global communication at your fingertips. You don't need a guy in Boston with a printing press to reach thousands of people. You have a supercomputer in your pocket.
That's a challenging thought.
So ask yourself, are you using your immense connectivity to build up a unified kingdom, to share the truth, and to encourage those in the trenches? Or are you just using it to throw those odious names at your opponents from across a digital divide? We will see you next time on Reformed Thinking.